So I'm going to talk about a research and professional development project that I conducted in collaboration with my colleague and friend from Ohio State University, Ian Wilkinson. And the goal of this project was to design and test a comprehensive professional development program aimed to help teachers learn how to engage elementary school students in argumentation during class discussions in language arts settings. And this was a large multi-year, multi-site research project. So I'm going to give you a little context about this. But to just kind of start us off and to help you get a sense of what we try to accomplish in this professional development program, I'm going to show you a short video of a classroom discussion. And in this video, we're going to see fifth grade students, this is right here, discussing a story. This discussion took place in the later part of the school year, during which this teacher participated in our professional development program. And in the video, you will see teacher using what we call like a fishbowl arrangement, where half of the class are seated around and discussing, with the teacher discussing the story. And then you don't see it on this picture, but there is another larger circle of students that are observing this discussion and actually evaluating it using one of the assessment tools that we developed. And then they switch. So that's just kind of to give you an understanding of what's going on. And the teacher and the student are discussing a story titled Deadly Hits. That's a picture from the story. And this story is about a real life accident that happened during the game of American football, not European football. And in this story, a boy named Zach gets a concussion during the game, but he continues to play despite this accident, and he eventually collapses in the field. He's taken to the hospital, and he ends up with serious lifelong disability. So the discussion question for this video is who was responsible for Zach's injury? Let me move this. So I also shared the transcript of this video. So you can, if you have it, you can follow along, just, to make sure that you hear everything. And I would like for you to just pay attention to things that you see in the video, what teachers is doing, what students are doing, because maybe we'll have a little bit of discussion after this, just to see what jumped at you. And then I'll talk about our way of looking at this video. Sounds good?
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. How do I get out of this? Escape. Okay. So.
Off this morning. Okay, Johan?
Wow. I think who was responsible for Zach's injury would be the coach, because he was the one who let Zach play when he shouldn't, because he knew that he already had an injury.
I disagree with Johan, because it actually said in the passage that Zach thought that his team needed help, so he decided to go in because the coach wasn't trained to find a concussion. So he decided to go in on his own without the coach telling him to, because the coach wasn't trained to see a concussion.
I agree with Angela because...
Speak up just a little bit.
I agree with Angela because, if you wouldn't if you know we got hurt and we insisted to go back into something like that, like you would at least make sure that we're okay. And like I think Zach's coach probably did that. I think Zach's coach probably made sure that he was okay. So it's not all of his fault. Like he, as an adult, should like say no. Maybe you could go back in the next time, but like it's not only his fault.
So wait, how is that agreeing with Angelo? Because Angelo said it's not the coach's fault, but
Yeah, I don't think it's the coach's fault either.
but you said as an adult he should. I want you to just clarify.
Okay, I agree with Angelo, like everything that he said, but like it's not complete. Like, okay, I just agree with Angelo. Like what he said, I don't. Because like it's not. The coach didn't say Zach could get back in here. Like Zach wanted to, and he went in on his own.
Yeah. I disagree with Johan. I don't find that it's the coach's fault, because in a paragraph it says that the coaches weren't trained at that time or whatever to know what a brain concussion looks like, because brain concussions are invisible injuries. It says it in the story, so I don't find that it's the coach's fault.
Dad was hurt or
Just say now. I think
Yeah,
you
but he
want.
said that he was all right. So like, how's the coach supposed to know? Yeah.
Okay, so let's let him respond to that. They challenged you, right? So now let's let Johan respond. We had a few challenges, so let's let Johan maybe respond to that challenge, and maybe I don't know what.
But if you see someone fall down there hard on their head and come back to the bench saying it's an all right, the coach should know that they've been in an injury and the coach should not let them play.
But the concussion is
Does
an
anybody
invisible
hear
injury.
you?
It doesn't mean
But you
out.
see the guy falling on the floor.
Yeah,
He's
that
trying
was
to say
that was
just like
hurt.
does the coach let you go back in? Does he check you first and then you go back in?
He would like ask if you're okay.
Exactly.
And he did.
But if you say you're
And he
alright, he
said
lets you back in the
alright.
game.
Like,
But
you're
Johan
supposed
said,
to. It's
"Oh,
like
man."
it's like kind of. It's not like your doctor's gonna be with you there.
Exactly.
It's kind of like lying to your doctor. If you say no, I'm not alright. I mean, if you say yes, I'm alright, but you know that you're not, and you really want to play, like, how's the coach gonna know? Like,
Exactly.
he has trust in his players. I'm sure Brian's coaches has trust in him. Like,
And like
his
they were
other
saying, it
friends.
was like his best player. It's kind of says it in the story.
Yeah, but Johan said he was knocked out on the floor. It says seconds tick by. That means like if it was like a boxing match, 10 seconds past, he would have been knocked out already. So he was like probably like there standing like that, and if he was okay, he wouldn't want to waste seconds just standing there
But he
thinking
got
about what
what-
happened.
When I get
Let him finish. Let him.
It's like saying you get an injury, you're just sitting there holding in pain, and like you can just get back up. That wasn't his problem. He couldn't get up. It took seconds for him to get up.
So what position?
he
Wait.
got
So
at.
what position then are you supporting? You gave some evidence, and you gave evidence from the article. What position then are you supporting?
Yeah, it wasn't his fault.
Who?
It wasn't Zach's fault because the coach saw he was like on the floor for seconds and seconds, and he didn't make a move until he got back up.
So you're agreeing with Johan?
Yeah.
So your position is it's the coach's fault. He should have known.
Yeah, if he's on the floor for seconds.
But I disagree with Angelo because he said he went in on his own. Zach said he felt in the article. It said that Zach said he felt fine. He told his coach he felt fine. He didn't go on his own. He said he felt fine.
So what are you saying then? What's
I'm
your
saying
point?
that it's Zach's fault because
It's Zach's fault.
yeah.
But that's what I said. I said it was
Yeah.
Zach's
No,
fault.
but you
No,
said
but
he
you
went
kinda
in
see
on
what
his own.
I kind of
He's just disagreeing on your evidence.
Yeah,
your opinion.
yeah. You said he
It
went
says
on his
right
own.
here,
No.
Zach decided his team needed help, so he went back
But
in
he
the game.
said he felt fine.
Right. So you're
everybody's fault.
So you're agreeing. You're actually agreeing with Angelo.
Yeah. I'm not
Yeah.
disagreeing.
In a way,
Okay, let Angelo respond because I think you understand.
It says literally on page 7, so it's easy to see why less than 15 minutes after his injury, Zach decided to go back in the game. The coach didn't say, go back in the game, Zach. Zach said, okay, I'm going to go back in the game because my team needed help.
So it's not the coach's fault.
Not the coach's
But I don't
fault.
think.
All right. So any comments maybe about what you saw, what jumped at you, what you saw as interesting, unusual, or problematic, anything?
Pueden hacerlo en español y yo ayudo ahí a traducir.
Anyone?
I can make a comment.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's like the brightest one, but one thing that at least draw my attention. Well, actually, two things. One, if it's possible to clarify what's written on the board. It's like a position,
Yeah.
Evidence. I'm not sure. Is that like instruction, like a ground rule for talk, something like that?
These were not ground rules for talk, although we do have ground rules for talk, and they would be maybe like somewhere here. And this is actually a list of argument elements that we discussed during the professional development training. And this teacher wanted to put it up for students to see and they refer to during the discussion. So it had basically labels for argument parts like position, reason, evidence. We even have warrant that we've tried to communicate to students and teachers, which is a difficult part to explain. And then we had objections and responses to objections. So this was actually this teacher's initiative to have this displayed in her classroom. And this was one of the, I think, most rewarding parts of professional development with teachers, is that they take what we discuss with them and they personalize them and make it their own. So this was not something we necessarily recommended. This was what this teacher wanted to do, but it's totally consistent with our goal of promoting argumentation during the discussions and argumentation development following the discussion. So this was, just her take.
That's great, because I also work with like teacher professional development under Antonio's supervision, and one of the things that we are struggling, at least my teachers were struggling, was like how to implement this kind of like structure of argumentation into something that the students would recognize and use. And this is like, at least for me, it's inspiring to see that you can frame something or use it. And the other thing that's like draw my attention was like these shifting modes of reasoning, which is something that I'm not sure if it's probably correct, but the idea that they change from like moral reasoning to practical reasoning to evidence-based reasoning, and then come back and they try to draw conclusions from some reasoning that was like missing, and maybe abductively they were trying to put things together and draw some conclusions. So that's something that like a mode of reasoning that was changing, at least they were playing with different reasoning modes. At a certain point, it felt to me that they were like in this like Piagetian realist moral reasoning. The default
it's kind of the context of this problem. It's what's called a socio-scientific issue. It has, it's a kind of a practical, the question for the discussion is who is responsible for Zach's injury? And to answer that question, you would draw on multiple sources of reasoning. You can use moral principles, you can use evidence from the article, and that's exactly what the students are doing. So that's kind of the setup was rich in that way, that where they had the article. If you see, they are all holding the text on their laps. They refer to the text explicitly to support their reasons with specific citations. So that's exactly what we were hoping would happen. And they also draw on personal experiences and on just general moral principle, like if the guy's on the floor, that's not good, you know. So yeah, so I agree, it had the kind of variety of types of reasoning going on here. And to kind of go back to your first remark, this, you know, so one of our purposes was to have students learn argumentation, criteria, structure, key principles. So instead of kind of lecturing them about what evidence is and what reason is, we use this rich discussion context to have them actually engage in argumentation, practice reasoning. And the teacher, one of the practices that we wanted teachers to do during the discussion is to label their talk. So the teacher said, for example, at some point she said, you gave us evidence, what's your position? So she's kind of in this immediate context of students discussing the story, she's finding ways to introduce these difficult concepts like evidence, positions, objections. And she said, well, they challenged you. Oh, we called it challenge or objection, yeah. They challenge you, so why don't you respond to challenge? So she's using this language of argumentation and labeling ways that students talk to basically teach important concepts that relate to argumentation. Let's take one more comment because I think it's very interesting.
Yo tengo una pregunta, pero, o sea, es como para ver si lo entendí bien, porque en el texto dice el estudiante 6 en algún momento que estoy en desacuerdo con tu evidencia, pero no con tu opinión. Entonces, claro, me llamó la atención esa parte, y ahora que tú lo estás explicando, no es que ellos hayan recibido entonces un entrenamiento, sino que es en el mismo momento en que ellos van como aprendiendo, por así decirlo, estas como etiquetas de qué es una evidencia, qué es una opinión. Eso no sé si me gustaría que comentara.
Ingrid is saying that she that she noted that one student 6 said, I disagree, or I don't disagree with your evidence, but I disagree with your opinion, or the other way around, I don't remember. So that was interesting, and she wanted to ask you whether you can comment on, basically, because what you are saying is that you didn't taught them in advance what was an evidence, what was an opinion, and so on. So that was something that they were learning through the discussions. So yeah.
That's exactly correct. And it's this phrase, you know, I disagree on your, they disagree on your evidence, not on your opinion, or something, whatever, I don't have a transcript in front of me, is one of the reasons I chose this clip, because it's such a good demonstration of kind of what are the possibilities of this format, discussion format. Of course, we don't see this often. This is pretty cool to hear things like this from 5th graders. But it is the idea, you know, the idea is that by, you know, by discussing authentic questions, controversial questions that students care about, they practice using argumentation, and the teacher structures that experience and helps them learn about the important functions of different elements of an argument, and they internalize it. Eventually it becomes their own, and they use it when appropriate. And so this is what we observed. We basically observed this Vygotskian theory of internalization in this video, and that's something we want to see. Now, again, we didn't teach it explicitly, but they had a lot of, this is towards the end of the year, where they had several months of participating in discussions like this. So they've had these experiences where they do what they're doing, on this video, and have the teacher again bring their attention, bring awareness to argumentation processes. Also, at the end of the discussion, we always have a closure where they kind of discuss what kind of arguments they constructed, like what do we think now, what our strongest reasons, what's our strongest evidence. So they've been practicing using that terminology for almost a school year. We also have post-discussion activities where after the discussion they write, read, or talk in a, for example, with a peer, not necessarily with a big group. So they do some kind of other post-discussion activity where they continue to practice. So for example, for this discussion, students could write a letter to the principal individually about what they think the strongest arguments were, what their position, what their argument is now after the discussion. They could stage, a news release about this. Like there could be multiple ways to further engage students, kind of build on this rich content that was generated during the discussion, and have them more individually practice those same skills. So that's the reason they are fluent in some way with this terminology, even though we did not lecture them about it. It's all coming from them actually using it in educationally rich contexts.
Alina, can I just point out a brief thing? It might be obvious, but of course it's so nice to see like a kind of engaged discussion. I mean, so many counter arguments, so that yeah, that's a very good point. We do. We had a very clear goal of not turning this into another boring school task. Like this was very important for us, which is difficult because we also had a very clear goal of having this be rigorous. We did not want students to just exchange like unexamined opinions. And that's what we often see in open discussions where students just say what they think, and then the next person says what they think, and it just goes in this kind of sequential fashion without students really interrogating each other's reasoning. This teacher actually called this, and that was again her idea, her language, she called it popcorn talk. And she explicitly told students, like it was popcorn where, there's just ideas popping up and disappearing in the discussion, like popcorn. And she explicitly told students, let's not do popcorn talk. Let's connect to each other's ideas, respond to each other's ideas. And they've practiced doing it successfully. The other reason for this high level of engagement, which I think is very important, is that we very carefully chose stories and questions, discussion questions that provoked disagreement and also were relevant and important to students. So this story, again, we've kind of done this professional development over 3 years in an iterative fashion, trying different versions of stories and strategies. And so, for example, this story is one of our winners. It's a story that always provokes heated discussions and a lot of disagreements. And again, the teachers also, the teachers were trained to build on that disagreement or even introduce it or somehow promote it if it was not naturally happening. So there are a lot of thought and structure that went into creating this level of engagement. But this is something we struggled with because
as I said, like the more you structure it or make it, I don't know, rule-based and proper and, and teacher-like or school-like, the less engagement there is. And so while we wanted students to learn very specific things about argumentation, and we wanted argumentation to have high quality, which means that they needed to rely on clear criteria of what's acceptable, what's relevant, and how do you put these ideas together. But at the same time, we also wanted them to be authentic, free to express what they think and react to each other's ideas. So there is a tension there that we sort of struggled with, and there is really no good answer today about how much teacher intervention or teacher intervention is optimal to sustain both engagement and quality and rigor, and that's something that we keep thinking about. So good question too. Well, I'm gonna move to kind of review our way of thinking about this discussion, what we try to accomplish. So we call this type of talk that you just observed inquiry dialogue, taking this label from Walton's taxonomy of dialogues, where he identified 6 dialogue types and specified specific aims, norms, and practices of each type. So the aim of inquiry dialogue is to collectively find the most reasonable answer to a contestable question. So the purpose is not to convince others, as in persuasion, or to make concessions to reach an agreement as a negotiation, which is another way to argue, but rather to use best available reasons and evidence together to advance towards the truth. So we chose this type of dialogue specifically based on the work of philosophy for children scholars like Mon Gregory and Susan Gardner. And these scholars highlighted the directional nature of inquiry as an essential feature of productive discussions. So inquiry dialogue has cumulative quality, meaning that there is a systematic movement towards the truth, even if it remains unreachable ideal. So it's not the answer. We don't believe that at the end of the discussion, students will find the truth, but we think that the movement towards the truth is important, where some reasons or positions or evidence are being eliminated in this process of moving towards the truth. So we see inquiry dialogue as not teacher-centered or student-centered, but truth-centered, meaning that the goal, again, is to work together to advance, to eliminate certain prepositions in this advancement towards the truth. And this goal of finding the most reasonable answer, again, requires certain rigor in the way that students discuss, participate in the discussion. And that's why it places heavy demands on both teachers and students, because they have to not only express what they think, but listen to what others think, relate their statements to what others say, find flaws in others' arguments, and all of this have to be happening in real time. So we assumed that, and based on evidence we know from other studies, that these kind of skills are not readily available for both students and teachers. So we spent a lot of time working with teachers to develop this new strategies of scaffolding student talk. And we also expected that teacher scaffolding, teacher intervention during the discussion would be relatively high at the beginning, because again, we know from literature that students don't possess argumentation skills. They do possess them, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. Students don't know how to argue well. They do know how to argue, but they don't know how to argue well. So we expected that teacher intervention would be relatively high at the beginning, but again, with this Vygotskian ideas of students internalizing discourse practices first introduced or modeled by the teacher or other students, eventually the teacher intervention should decrease, and the teacher ideally would eventually become just one of the participants, and the students will adopt facilitation strategies and argumentation practices that they've been observing as they participated in the discussion. And another assumption we made is that when teacher intervenes, her intervention should be clearly procedural rather than substantive, meaning that the teacher should not be telling students what she thinks or what she thinks they should think, but she should be commenting on processes of argumentation. And we actually describe those processes very specifically in one of our instructional and assessment tools that I will hopefully get to talk about. And I also wanted to mention that, so these assumptions that I just described, that inquiry dialogue is the model that we want to use, and that teacher should be present in the discussion. Like we saw teacher intervening in this clip several times, and that her comments should be about procedures or processes of argumentation. All of these assumptions are what we think is best to support argumentation development. And I want to mention that there are other models and successful models too that rely on completely different, not completely different, but very different assumptions about how to best support the development of argumentation. And a very good example is the work of Diana Kuhn and her colleagues, where the teacher is just not present, and it's very carefully designed curriculum materials that do the work of modeling practices of good argumentation, and the model, the type of dialogue that Kuhn and colleagues are promoting in their pedagogical approach is persuasion. So they focus on debates where students kind of set up to discuss controversial issues. They're supplied with a lot of materials where they can get reasons and evidence on both sides. I mean, it's a completely different model. And I just want to say that that's an interesting research issue, if anybody is looking for one, to see what are the affordances and limitations of these different assumptions that people make today about how to best support student learning of argumentation. Because we really, until now, have been comparing this innovative approaches, like, let's say what we are doing and what Diana Kuhn is doing. We typically compare it to typical instructions or regular instructions, or in other words, instruction where argumentation does not happen that much. So to just kind of realize that we're all making assumptions about what the best approach is, and that we may be gaining and losing something when we focus on a particular type of dialogue, on a particular way of teacher scaffolding versus just peer interaction. And these are interesting questions to pursue. So let me tell you a little bit about this study and how we approached it before I focus on one of the tools that we used. So basically, in this project, we did what I just said everybody else is doing, which is we didn't get to compare our assumptions about the best way to support argumentation with those of other researchers. We tried to develop a program and then compare it to typical instruction. And the project lasted for 3 years, and each year we worked with a new cohort of teachers. We tried a version of a professional development program, collected data to evaluate its effectiveness, and then revised it based on this data. And then in the next year, introduced the revised version and did it again. And so we did it 3 times. And in year 3, so in year 1 and 2, we used what's called a design study, where we worked collaboratively with teachers to develop an intervention that would have a chance of withstanding the challenges of everyday practice. We relied on our teacher participants, like the teacher you saw in the video, to bring their expertise and experiences to inform us what works and what doesn't work in this messy, real life setting of elementary school classroom. And so we did very small studies in year 1 and 2. We had maybe like 4 or 5 teachers at each site, and we didn't have a control group because we just wanted to get as much information as possible from the teachers, with the teachers, to figure out what are the effective curriculum materials and strategies for teachers to learn this, and for their students to learn this content. And then in the 3rd year, we conducted a randomized pre-post experimental study where about 26 teachers participated in, no, I think it was less. Like 14 teachers participated in our professional development, and the other 14 didn't. And we implemented our year-long professional development program and then evaluated the outcomes. So in our year 3, I just want to briefly review what we ended up with. So our professional development in the end lasted for 36 contact hours, and we were in schools from October through April. So again, very labor intensive, and it's not a one-day workshop. It's really prolonged professional development with a lot of individual attention to teachers. So during this program, we have 2 days of workshops where we kind of introduced the program to teachers. After that, we met with teachers bi-weekly, and then we kind of reduced this involvement. At the end of the program, we only met once a month for this after-school study group meetings, where we practiced facilitation, discussed challenges that teachers encountered in their classrooms, and introduced new concepts. And we also videotaped teacher discussions every month. And we had 6 individual coaching sessions with the teacher, where the teachers watched their own video with what we called a discourse coach, a person from our research team, a well-trained person from our research team who helped the teacher reflect on their own facilitation and student argumentation using an assessment tool that we've developed, and also discussing any kind of challenges or accomplishments as they watched the discussion. And we had focus group interviews with teachers. And again, we collected pre-test and post-test data from teachers and students and analyzed it. So there's a lot of very rich data. So just to give you a sense, these are pictures of our workshops and study groups and focus group meetings, and we videotaped all of our professional development activities So we had tons of data. We videotaped the discussions. These are these individual coaching sessions where this is our discourse coach working with the teacher as they watch the video, and they also have an instrument that they use to draw their attention to specific aspects of the discussion and then reflect on how successful these are. And as I said, we also tested students to see whether participating in this discussion actually transferred to individual competences of reading, writing, and speaking individually. So we published a lot of academic articles from this project, but what we also done, and this was a very fun project, is to write a book for teachers where we basically presented our instructional materials, practices, and assessment tools, and kind of explained how this could be used in a professional development setting. And so how much more time do I have, Antonia?
Sorry, I don't know what. 10. Probably 5-10 minutes at maximum to have 30 minutes to questions and discussion.
Okay, yeah. All right, so I'll skip a couple of things. Yeah, so let me just very briefly in the last 5 minutes introduce you this instructional observational tool that we developed called argumentation rating tool, which became very central to our professional development program. We, you know, it helped. Well, let me tell you about it. It basically became like a textbook for what we expected teachers to learn. And it also was very helpful for teachers as they facilitated the discussion and also reflected on their own facilitation. So it's, you see this, this is my colleague Ian Wilkinson holding this. It's like a 12-page booklet that we've developed. And what we tried to do in this project is we very quickly realized that in order for us to succeed with this goal of helping teachers develop the ability to facilitate argumentation during discussions, we had to figure out the way to clearly explain key criteria of what quality argumentation means. We have to identify those criteria and explain them in the language that teachers and students can understand. So this, so first we identified this key criteria of good arguments, and we got this criteria from literature, scholarship on formal logic, informal logic, critical thinking, argumentation. So from all these philosophy books, but then we translated it into practical language that, again, teachers and students can understand. So these are things like we need to consider different perspectives. We need to be clear in language and structure our arguments. We need to use well-examined and accurate reasons and evidence, and we have to be logical, or we have to connect our reasons and evidence well. But like having this criteria doesn't really help teachers to know specifically what to do during the discussion. And so what we've done is we identified key practices that the teachers can use to enforce a particular criteria. So if we look at clarity, for example, if things are not clear, these are 4 key practices that the teachers can use to improve, enhance the quality. She can clarify meaning, work on connecting ideas, work on labeling moves and parts and argument. And this is a more general, she can kind of summarize or track the line of inquiry or have the students summarize it. So just so having these practices is also just having them kind of stated here, like these are the 4 practices, go ahead and use them, is still not enough for teachers to, again, know specifically what to do. So we took each of these practices, and we're just going to look at one, and further explain the specified it for teacher by turning it into like a rating scale. And so if we look at just one, connecting ideas, here it is. You can see like a page from this argumentation rating tool where you can see a rating scale here going from 1 to 6. And we have teacher, kind of what teachers should be doing to be at the advancing level, and what students should be saying or doing to be at the advancing level. So again, let's just look at this description a little closer. So here we are. You can see that in this kind of first part, we explain the principle, like the teacher should clarifies the reasoning by making visible connections. The teacher prompts students to relate their idea to what's been said for others in specific ways. And this is a very important, this is a very important sentence here. This happens whenever students fail to build on or challenge each other's arguments. So we kind of structured our tool to have teachers intervene only when and if it's necessary. And that is very different from other previous tools that we've reviewed when we were working on this project, where having more of certain discourse practices is considered to be better. So the more times the teacher says something like, how are you agreeing with, or which part are you agreeing with, the better, the higher the score the teacher will get. Well, we took a different approach because we think that if the students are doing a good job on a particular practice, like if they're connecting to each other well, the teacher should not be intervening and should not be getting high scores for saying things, right? So again, this is this idea of gradual release of responsibility, where if students are doing well, there is no need for teachers to intervene. So our tool is structured not as more is better, and not as less is more. We want teacher to be there, but only when necessary. And here in italics, you see that we actually gave teachers specific expressions or stems or talk moves that they can use, although these are obviously just examples. And we saw teachers not, kind of, they really wanted this on the one hand, but they also were able to personalize it, internalize it, and develop their own language. So these were just kind of the starters at the beginning of the project, but we did observe that teachers were able to develop their own ways of expressing similar ideas. I think I'll have to stop here, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it might be a good idea, but you can, I don't know, you want a couple of more minutes to close? That's okay.
Okay, so let me just see. So this argumentation rating tool ended up being, again, very central to our professional development efforts. This kind of 4 criteria gave us a structure. So we kind of discuss each criteria. We introduced the entire tool, but then we focused on each criteria. So it kind of gave us a structure of how to approach the sequence of professional development. We also use this argumentation rating tool during these coaching sessions, where the teachers would watch a segment of the video, their own video, and then assign a score to themselves, but not because we wanted to grade them, but just to kind of engage them in a critical reflection on their performance with the coach. So they would say, well, maybe I'm 5, What do you think? Maybe I could do more. And this was just kind of a prompt for helping teachers evaluate their own practice. The teachers also had like a one-page version of this tool, which they often took with them to the discussion, and just kind of to remind themselves what is it that they were supposed to be doing, especially at the beginning. This was, again, we worked with teachers to learn what they need. And so this is something that they suggested and asked us to do, because again, they were too new to this practice and they wanted like a cheat sheet, a reminder about what they're supposed to do. And then we also use that same tool to evaluate their progress from the pre to post-test discussions during our professional development. If I have one more minute, I just wanted to show you, do I have one more minute, Antonia?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is going to be the last slide. I just wanted to show you kind of how it worked during coaching, because I think, again, this was one of the most effective ways we were able to draw teacher very close attention to the type of language that they were using during the discussion and the type of language that their students were using in the discussion, and not just the type of language, but the content. So basically, you can see like an excerpt from a coaching session where a coach and a teacher are watching a video and discussing teacher and student argumentation. So for example, I'm just going to read this. So he's saying, the coach is saying, all right, and he's reading from the argumentation rating tool. So clarify their ideas, restate each other's responses. So what are you thinking on this one? He's asking, like, how do you rate yourself? And the teacher says, well, I marked at least 3 times in that part that we watched where I did do that. So let me make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying that, so here teacher is basically looking at her own practice with this very, in this very close critical way, finding specific phrases that she used to address the issue of clarity. Let me make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying, and then she said, I marked 3 times when I heard myself do that. But I always kind of said the same thing each time. So now she's questioning her use of language and saying, maybe there are other ways to say this, or maybe, so maybe I could expand my repertoire of talk. And when I look down at this list, and she's referring to the list of prompts on our tool, there are other ways that I could be saying it too. Like, I would like to do more of this others, instead of just saying, I hear you saying, and what do you mean? And the coach says, I was going to say, I saw the revoicing move pretty frequently. So I think you're doing this good job, but I do like this. Can someone else say? So the coach kind of pushes her to a new level where she would ask students to paraphrase or clarify each other's ideas. And so, this is just an example of how this tool really brings close attention to talk and a very analytical way of looking at discussion practices. And I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alina. I will stop sharing your screen in order to see our faces.
Yes.
And yes, and I will, as Alejandra did the days before, if we can turn on the cameras. Entonces, si es que es posible prender las cámaras para que podamos vernos las caras. Y bueno, y abrimos el espacio para preguntas, comentarios, reacciones. Pueden ser en español, en inglés, no importa, como todos los días hasta aquí. So then, thank you very much, Alina. I just asked everyone that, could turn their cameras on, and I asked them to comment or make questions or whatever in Spanish or English.
You can also speak in Russian if you want.
Yeah, well, I can't. I don't know if someone in the audience is able to.
Just in case.
It would be wonderful. And yes, and I forget to say that please use the raise hands tools of Zoom that you can find at reactions with the reactions, or if you have not updated Zoom in the participants section. So I think we have two questions. First, Valentina, and then Ingrid. Vale.
Okay, I try to speak in English, okay? Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very illuminating for me, for my work, especially the curriculum materials that you present, in the sense that the focus that is very important to translate to the teachers the specifically things that they have to enact during the classroom activity. So my question is, in your the development program, where you put the focus? I mean, it's very important to scaffold these procedural enactments. So, but the program is more, I think, I'm not sure, but the focus more focus in the reflections, in the, okay, you have to realize this, or the coaching. But I think the focus is, I think, in my develop of my ideas, I think the focus could be more during the classroom, when the teacher put into practice this kind of, for example, the thing that you said about intervenir solo cuando es necesario. ¿Cómo hago esa, Antonia, si me ayuda ahí? Como...
To intervene just when it's necessary.
Yes, this kind of knowledge, it's developed in practice during the activity. You know, so I think it's my question is, how do you imagine a development program for teachers that the teachers could be enact this kind of repertoire? I mean, it's where's the focus, the reflection or the practice? That's my tension in my own proposed development of ideas about this topic.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Valentina. And I read your paper and I know why you're asking. And that was actually my question to you after I read your paper. So it's really a difficult, it's a tension. And so I mean, well, you can't reflect, the reflection is on practice. So the reflection requires practice. And we ask teachers to do at least one discussion every week throughout, like from October to May of our professional development. So they had a lot of practice, and the professional, but in my opinion, practice alone is not sufficient, because they have to analyze their practice. And that was what professional development was for. So coaching was a prime example of this analysis, where you just specifically look at your own practice. Remember, they're watching their own videos, so they are looking at their own practice and addressing questions like, should I have intervened here? What do you think? Or am I intervening too much? What do you think? Like, they watch the video and they ask like these questions about when to step in and when to hold back was the most common, you know, because it requires a really clear understanding of, well, it requires you to evaluate the argument in real time, find flaws, and then decide whether this particular flaw is like dangerous enough or big enough for you to actually step in, right? So this is a lot of judgments that teachers are expected to do in real time. So this was a very common questions from teachers, like when do I step in, when do I step back? Because again, this question of engagement is important here, because if the teacher is too present in the discussion, then students are not as engaged. So we, it's a dance. We actually use the metaphor of a dance in terms of just kind of like how you have to be reciprocal and react to what your partner is doing in the dance. And you guys are good at those things, I think. So anyway, to really kind of respond to what's happening with just enough intervention, not too much, not too little. So I think it's a combination of practice and reflection. And by the way, we also had other, not just coaching, we had other activities during the professional development, and they were all about, teachers coming back to us, let's say to our study group meetings, and talking about challenges and successes. So we, for example, could show a short clip of a video from one of the teachers to demonstrate how something was done effectively. Or we ask teachers, like, what are you struggling with? And we try to troubleshoot and offer suggestions. So yeah, it was a lot of reflection, but it was on their own practice. And that's how we did it. I don't think just giving them these materials and telling them go practice would have worked. And we've seen in our other studies, we've seen teachers who maybe heard somewhere that they should be doing open discussions, but didn't get a lot of training. And they try to use those same discourse moves, like saying, what do you think? Or why do you think that? But they do it without understanding the quality of argumentation, of student argumentation. So it becomes formulaic, and it just becomes what actually one of the authors, Borboles, called pseudo inquiry. It's like, it's not really an inquiry, it's just people saying what they want to say. It's this popcorn talk, and the teacher has limited repertoire of things that she knows how to do, like saying, what do you think? And then saying, okay, what do you think? And this is kind of all you hear. And again, that shows that this teacher the teacher is adopting some of the superficial practices, adopting this practice superficially, like she hasn't internalized why we're doing this. What's the underlying text that you're supposed to, facilitate, right? It's not about the moves, right? It's about using the moves to achieve certain goals. And if you don't have the goal in mind, then it just becomes useless, right? It's just, it doesn't go anywhere. So that's my convoluted response to your very good question.
Thank you.
Ingrid.
Sí, bueno, tengo como dos preguntas chiquititas. Una es respecto de los profesores, ¿qué fue como lo que más les costó o con lo que más como lucharon, por así decirlo, en este entrenamiento? Pensando, por ejemplo, en estos criterios que mostraba de los argumentos de calidad. Y si lo que aprendieron los profesores se mantuvo en el tiempo, si lo siguieron utilizando después en sus clases. No sé si...
Ingrid has two questions. The first one is which part or aspect was more difficult for the teachers, or which aspects were the ones who they struggle more with? I don't know. Yeah. And the second one was, sorry.
si siguieran como usando estas como habilidades aprendidas.
If the teachers continue using these skills, like these learned skills a long time.
I'll start with the second one because it's easy to answer, and that is we don't know. Because unfortunately the way research projects are structured is you get a grant, you get resources to do this, and then the grant is over and you just need another grant, and then you work with some new teachers. So unfortunately we haven't followed up with these teachers. We have few teachers that we came back to like work as consultants on our project. So we have some anecdotal evidence that at least some of them are continuing to use it and at some level, but yeah, basically we don't know. This is actually a problem that, I struggle with the kind of the setup of research and professional development and how it's just very hard to do long-term interventions yeah, so it's a good question, but I don't have a solution. And the first question is about what was more difficult for teachers. So we actually researched this question very thoroughly because we, first of all, we videotaped all the professional development activities, including coaching and study group meetings. Then we transcribed like a randomly selected sample of these activities, and we coded teacher comments. Actually, can I share the screen to show? I think, wait, let me just first see if I have it here. No, okay, well, hold on one second. I just wanted to show because it may be interesting for people who are also coding and just a second. I know time is very valuable, so I'll just, I'll give up in a second. All right, I found, yeah. So, we, you see my screen, right? So you see that we basically classified teacher comments into content categories. And these were things like practical issues. These are things when teachers were saying like, I really like this program, but I just don't have the time to do it. So because we have standardized tests coming up or other things, right? Where I have to teach content. So these are the things, facilitation moves, it's any kind of questions or comments about what to do when I intervene, what do I say, classroom experience, like how well or how not well it went, finding texts for students to support the discussion, questions about argumentation, like what is a warrant? I still don't understand what warrant means. Questions about how helpful or not helpful it is to watch your own video, coaching, all of this other stuff. So first we just classified the comments into these categories, and then we coded them as either positive or negative or helpful or difficult. And so then we overlapped those codes, and you can see here that most of the questions or a lot of the questions were about practical issues, teachers finding time to have these discussions because although they address certain curriculum goals that teachers have, it's at a much deeper level than I think they were expected to do. Like this much focus on argumentation was not something they thought they needed, although they did like what they saw. But again, this is just, again, the reality of working in today's high stakes environment is that we're constantly persuading teachers to do things that are very important, but may not be on a test or may not be aligned, which was what teachers are evaluated for. And then facilitation moves was the second most frequent category. And you can see that we have as many comments where something we did or something they experienced was helpful for them, and similarly difficult. So this was, an issue that teachers really struggled with. So yeah, these are, so for example, one of the things about facilitation, as I already mentioned, was about how, when to intervene and what to say. We also have teachers struggle with certain just concepts of argumentation, like logical validity is just hard thing to teach. And the way we approached it is we had teachers basically reconstruct student arguments from their either transcript or the video. So sometimes it happened during coaching where the coach would help the teacher, like together with the coach, the teacher would try to figure out, kind of reconstruct the structure of the argument that the student were making, and then find opportunities as they were doing it, the opportunities for intervention for improving that argument would become more clear. And that's one of the lessons we learned actually in this project, is that it doesn't, I'm going to stop sharing, it doesn't make sense to evaluate, to discuss the talk moves or teacher intervention practices without first analyzing the quality of student arguments. So in this tool that we had teacher and student descriptions. We would always start with student description first. Like, what is it that students are saying? Like, what kind of positions are they taking? What kind of reasons are they offering? What kind of evidence are they using? We have to reconstruct that first, understand what's going on first, and then ask ourselves, how can I improve it? Where could I, what requires my attention? What can I highlight as a good practice or a good use of evidence? Or where could I find a flaw that I can address with a carefully chosen talk move? So that's what we were doing during those coaching sessions. And that was the most difficult part, I think.
Thank you, Alina. Constanza, and then Michael.
Thank you, Antonia. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Alina, for such an interesting talk. I just have two questions. First of all, the first one is, I want to go back to this theoretical idea that you share about Kuhn's work and how her team and her work is being devoted to promote this kind of persuasion talk. And your work and your colleagues' work it's rooted in this inquiry talk, that it's according to the research better suited to find the best truth, as you define. I was thinking, because I'm very familiar with the teams that you're the subjects that you've been treating. So, but I've been more inclined to deliberative talk. So I was thinking if you would agree that maybe inquiry talk, it's better suited for primary students that are not maybe familiar with all the argumentative dance. I love that metaphor that you use. And maybe if we go further, I'm thinking of teenagers or undergraduates, maybe we could evolve to a deliberative talk that, in my opinion, it's better suited to resolve some controversies that are more linked, with the citizenship or democratic issues. So what do you think about that? That's one question. And the other one that it's very maybe easy to respond, but I think it's very linked with what Ingrid and Valentina's asked before, is which age are, the average age of the teachers that work with you? And with the age, I'm actually meaning or trying to draw conclusions by the age about the dispositions they had with the professional development program. I was also thinking after Ingrid made her question, how also we could make this positive improvement effects in teachers make last longer. Should we go into teacher training programs? Maybe. My answer is yes, of course. But what do you think about that? To make maybe a large effort or a more sustainable effort in this approach. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent question, Constanza. Questions, and I think I also read your paper, right? You're today too.
No, I'm not. I'm commenting Valentina's and Ingrid's work, but my work is super
also
related with everything. Yeah. So
okay.
Sure.
Yeah, but this question about deliberation versus inquiry. So I actually think, very good question, and you're probably using like Felton.
He was one of my supervisors. So it's that kind of framework.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I actually think it's the difference between inquiry and deliberation is very subtle. And so I don't think we are doing different things. The only difference that I can identify, and it's not really, so like, for example, we see the aim of the dialogue to reach the most reasonable answer. In deliberation, it's the best action. So that's the difference. But again, for example, in the story that students were discussing, who is responsible? Is it action or answer? It's very subtle, and I don't think it's that important in terms of kind of the practices that are being used during the discussion, like the facilitation. I think it's a matter of semantics, like what we call things. I think the overlap is big. I'm struggling to find the difference actually between these two types of talk. So so then I would say elementary or undergraduate students, I don't make that age-based difference necessarily. I feel like creating opportunities for students to have authentic engagement where they are using argumentation. It doesn't matter whether you're a fifth grader or undergraduate students, both groups don't do it well, unfortunately, and so if we can find the way to have them practice those skills that leads to improvement in those skills. It doesn't matter what age that this is. With persuasion, though, there is, I think, a difference. And although our group is focused on inquiry and we have reasons for that, and by the way, these reasons are more theoretical than empirical because there is really very little research or none that really compares these different formats. But I do see advantages of persuasion, for example, although I'm not doing it, but I can defend persuasion easily. For example, I think that competitive nature of persuasion, where you are arguing to win, has affordances. I think it's motivating, it's exciting, you know, and you really need to, like in a good debate, you need to anticipate all these counter arguments and come back with rebuttals for those. I mean, there is a lot of high level cognitive work going on, and there is an exciting game aspect to it. So there could be reasons to use that particular type of dialogue. But I would be interested to know, like, what do we lose and what do we gain? Like, there may be some, for example, epistemological or epistemic competencies that are better promoted with inquiry dialogue, where you see knowledge as a collaborative construction. You know, there could be, and but again, these are all just theoretical propositions. The other complexity, by the way, is that a particular dialogue is not going to stay within an assigned dialogue type. Like what you saw in the clip, for example, there was persuasion there, right? Although we would label it as inquiry because of the way we set it up, and we try to train teacher to use words like "what do we think" rather than "what do you think." But but in authentic interactions, people don't stick to a particular dialogue type, and it's not a bad thing. Like, there should be persuasion in inquiry dialogue, and there should be inquiry in persuasion dialogue, right? Like, there's not that necessarily clear distinction. So. And another complexity is that during different maybe like stages of dialogue, there could be different dialogue types that are more appropriate. So there is a lot of complexity there. And I think if we find effective ways to engage students in argumentation of high quality, like, that's good. But I think clarity is important. At least, like, what are we trying to do? What's our goals with it? I think we at least need to be clear about that, but also flexible. And your second question, the age of the teachers in our study was very varied, because we basically recruited from local schools, and, you know, different people agreed. We had very young teachers who just started their profession, and we had veteran teachers who were retiring next year. So it was a big range. And yeah, there are different problems at different stages in one's career. So that's another good research question, like, what is more appropriate for beginning teacher? What's more appropriate for veteran teacher? And in terms of teacher training, like, should we be doing it in teacher preparation program? Yes. So yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alina.
Thanks, Alina. We will probably take a few more minutes, because we should, we are on time, but let's take a few more minutes, and then we do the break. Michael?
To get my microphone on. Thank you, Alina. This is super interesting, and I wished we had the opportunity to sit tonight over a good meal and a glass of wine and discuss more of this. This is mind-blowing, I would want to say. Let me just focus on one aspect that I saw with the very first, the clip you showed. Because apart from argumentation, there is a lot of other stuff going on. Yeah, one thing, this is in a classroom. Yeah, this is in an organization of school. And some, still at my college level students, school is not where I'm doing engaging in the kinds of practices I do outside of school. But more relevant maybe is what the teacher is organizing is also relational activity. And there, I was thinking that certain aspects of what a teacher is managing, and what we are managing with our college students, are issues of relational work, where there is gender, where there is, this was a very multi-cultural group. There's race, there is also age, and all kinds of issues are also working at the same time. Now, in some sense, sometimes they can be brought into the practice of what we could call arguing or argumentation. But at other times, they may clash. Yeah, they may not, so that's where, if the teacher is engaging students in doing better relational work, like turn taking, it may interfere with what the teachers are trying to accomplish at the level of being able to reason. So that would be one thing. But the other thing that also filters in here, some of the kids are bringing in a lot of background here, where the white helicopter mothers have been able to already coach them in these practices, while other kids have different, but also very valuable other practices, and how to bring these together. This is mind-blowing. I mean, this is really interesting how difficult and complex this is. But thank you for giving me a little bit, at least some insights of what I also can do better in my practices.
Well, thank you for this comment. There is a lot of complexity there. I think this kind of issues with diversity in all different ways that we work with. Again, it's an opportunity and a challenge. Yeah. And one way we try to, work with that is we spend a lot of time building community. Again, I am very influenced. I work at Montclair State University, which is where philosophy for children originated, and they have this concept of community of inquiry, and they wrote a lot of pedagogical literature about the importance of building community and very practical activities in a classroom that could help with this. So we work a lot on, having students develop their own ground rules, having students respect and listen to each other, and participation is very, it's another issue that, by the way, in terms of previous question about what was difficult for teachers, was managing participation, sharing control over managing participation with the students. We had teachers also, again, just inspired by our, professional development program, try new things and learn from this with students. Like, for example, this class particular that you saw had a lot of problems with interruptions. And you saw it even in this clip where they're just kind of gone crazy at some point. And they worked together through this. And at some point, the teacher, they decided, the students suggested that they would get 3 chips at the beginning of the discussion for 3 times to talk. And each time they talk, they give up their chip, right? So, that's what children suggested to address this issue. And when they started doing it, it just completely killed the discussion. Nobody wanted to use their chip before it gets really interesting, right? So it just there was just no discussion. And, they evaluated that and decided to go away with chips, but, use some other ways of monitoring participation and interruption. So it's a process, but I think that's another reason we prefer inquiry versus persuasion, because we do want to promote this collaboration and community, classroom community, where we support each other to figure out what's right. And we even say that, the answer to this big question, the contestable question, is nobody owns it personally. It's in the middle of the group. And we're trying to together get to that common understanding. So these kind of things where we are, you know, respecting and taking advantage of diversity, but also trying to establish commonality, I think is the way to, you know, kind of go about it. That's our assumptions.
Cool, thank you.
And Alina, just this is, I think, like an open comment. Just want to say what you think about this, and it's related with yesterday's events in Washington also.
Yes.
Because of course I agree with you. I work, you know, that I work also in argumentation promotion in education and so on, and I'm very convinced and persuaded that this is very important. But also always have been, at least here in Chile, I have thought that argumentation, and in education in particular, I don't know, it's like anybody, it's something that nobody cares about. You know, it's very difficult to make it valuable. And in 2019, we had violent riots. I don't know if you knew, social movement against inequality and neoliberal policies and Pinochet's constitutions and so on. Maybe similar to what you had in 2020 regarding Black Matter lives and so on. And I felt like, oh, well, this is important. It's not just important for me. I think it's important for our society. We have to be able to deal with our differences in a more peaceful way, and so on, so on, so on. But again, time passed through, and it was like, well, nobody cares about this again. And these are ideas that are so old. I mean, John Dewey at the beginning of the 20th century was arguing for these kind of things. A point regarding deliberation and so on. For example, for Dewey, notion of deliberation, probably inquiry, dialogue, and Felton deliberation would not be any different. Yeah, but then, but again, it's like nobody cares. And I always have thought like, well, but this is very important and so on. Society could be different if education is different and more deliberative and so on. And yesterday I was like, well, this kind of riot, of course, is related with the value of evidence and truth, and these conspiracy theories and so on. This is crazy. So I thought, well, this is different from Black Lives Matter. This is different from 2019 riots in Chile, because this has to do with evidence. So here, argumentation might be important. But at the same time, I think like, well, maybe not. I mean, maybe, and this is something also that Dewey pointed out. I mean, social inequality, I mean, social structures. If you don't change social structures, you could be so deliberative. You can have a deliberative education and so on, and you would have these kind of things. So I don't know, that's my of course I work on this and I love this, but at the same time I think, well, are we going somewhere? Because it's so different to change, and maybe there are good reasons for that. So that was and the second point just was to make a connection between Michael Bamber's talk on Tuesday regarding narratives, because also we have one student of the program that is working with a mix between argumentation and narrative. I mean, how you discuss narratives. And I know you have worked on that also with collaborative reasoning and so on regarding literature, discussing literature and so on. So I also wanted to I don't know, open a little bit that thing, and maybe just to take 2-3 minutes for your question, for your answer, and then we can close, and we can follow up in the discussion in the second part of the morning.
Well, I don't really have like much wisdom to share about this kind of vacillation between despair about like what we do and how insignificant it is compared to, you know, huge problems that economic and social that we are surrounded by. Like I go there too, Antonia, and also like sometimes a promise of, sometimes I feel that it is important. I mean, that's just being an academic, you know, and I mean, I mean, I think all of this issues are complex, and even yesterday, it was not all about just truth. There was also a lot of emotion and resentment and, you know, trust issues, like who do you trust, who's your friend, who's your enemy. So it's not just pure like cold, you know, headed deliberation. There's everything else mixed in. So, but I still believe fundamentally, I do still believe in education. And like, for example, there are countries where, yes, thank you, Michael. There are countries, I think, although it's getting more and more difficult to defend education because we're not seeing very promising outcomes today. But like, for example, in Finland, there are very few people believing in conspiracy theories. Like the percentage is like less than 10, I think. And also Finland is considered very progressive in terms of their educational policies and, you know, attention given to teaching, argumentation, and critical thinking. So, I mean, that's my best attempt to support you, Antonia, but I totally share this kind of dark thoughts about how meaningful it is to, you know, code discussions while the world is kind of falling apart. But I guess that's, everybody has their own, you know, piece to contribute.